You're listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and SoundCloud. We got a two-man show today. It's just myself, Zach, and Paige phoning in from Denver. We are obviously bored to death with this whole COVID-19 business, kind of laying us all up, isolating us all from the world. Mr. Van Horn, I'm sorry to hear you're laid up with a little lower back injury. Can't do the things that you'd like to typically do. So here we are, looking to fill the hours with another South Stands podcast episode. Today, I thought we'd really dive into this debate that seems to be raging on Twitter between some of the Ohio State beat writers and some of the guys that run various fan sites, which is the talent versus coaching debate. I thought the two of us could dive into that just for fun because we got nothing else to do. But before we get into that, just a few housekeeping notes. There have been some developments over the last week with the program. First, Jalen Gill, a five-star, I guess we'd call him an H-back / receiver / running back, kind of a versatile athlete. Wasn't quite clear what he was. I guess he was going to be an H-back at Ohio State. He was a five-star, if I'm not mistaken, from the 2018 class, one of the headliners. He has decided to enter the transfer portal. I saw a tweet from him thanking the university, thanking the program for the opportunity. Seems like a really nice kid, obviously very talented. I think he was caught between a rock and a hard place, the rock being a group of highly productive receivers in 2019, which included 3 receivers, KJ Hill, Ben Victor, Austin Mack, and 2 talented younger receivers, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. He was never going to see playing time in 2019. The hard place being the 2020 freshman class, loaded with elite talent at his position. As Urban Meyer likes to say, that's life in the big city, and Gill is entering the portal and remains to be seen where he lands. Paige, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the Gill transfer. What did you think?
As expected, right? We've talked about it. There's only one football, and if he wasn't beating out, and not to say these guys weren't great, but Hill and Mack and Ben Victor, and I know we're going to talk about the draft here in a little bit, but where they ended up getting drafted, then how the hell is he going to beat out Wilson and Olave, who we can almost guarantee are first round, second round talent for sure. And then, like you mentioned, these incoming kids, if they come in, they even reach, 80% of their potential. It's not going to happen. It's unfortunate. You predicted it. There's just, these kids are going to leave. Who's the other kid that we talked about?
Jamison Williams. Yeah.
Yeah, Jamison Williams. Looks like that kid just has amazing ability, but is he going to be able to find the field? I'd love to see him find some playing time, but I don't know. Is it going to happen? It's just going to be tough to see. But
good question. Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall for Gill. We could kind of see that this was coming just from the handful of spring practices that Ohio State managed to have before the COVID-19 outbreak. Garrett Wilson was he'd been moved to the slot, and that was the area, that was the position where Gill figured to make an impact. And, lo and behold, he's got a 5-star prospect who had a great freshman year in Wilson, working at his position, which was a bad sign for him. And there was no way he was going to beat out Wilson. And anyway, wish the kid well.
I think he was from. Was he from Worthington?
He is from Central Ohio. That much I know. Yeah. He, he one of the headliners of the 2018 class. And I had said a couple pods ago that I really felt like the 2020 season was kind of a referendum on the 2018 class, because we have not heard from many of these kids yet.
And
Jalen Gill was one of the kids that I was referring to. He's from Westerville, went to Westerville South.
Okay, right.
Should the 2020 season happen, we hope that it will. You got a bunch of kids at the top of that 2018 class that have not done much at all. Some for good reason. Teron Vincent being one of them, with serious injuries and stuff. But right now, from that 2018 class, the one guy that's really the only one that's really kind of become a star is Chris Olave. And, he's one of those stories that we seem to hear more and more often from Ohio State. And we'll get into this later. An afterthought in the class, not highly rated nationally. 399th, comes to Columbus and becomes a star. But Olave is really the only one from the 2018 class that's made much of an impact. A lot of these other kids, have yet to make their mark at the program. So we wish the best to Jalen Gill, and we'll see where he ends up. Just a couple of quick developments with the 2021 class, which is on its way to being perhaps historically great. In the last week, they picked up another verbal commitment, this one from Jansen Dunn out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. He was considered to be a strong Oklahoma lean and then decided to come to Ohio State to give his verbal commitment to Ohio State. He is being recruited as an athlete, but projects, I think, as a defensive back. He's got the kind of all the measurements of the type of defensive backs we like at Ohio State. Long, athletic, a little taller, kind of in that 6'1" range, 6'2". So another nice pickup for Ohio State. I'm also reading that per the 24/7 recruiting staff, pretty much everyone that recovers recruiting at that site, they're saying Emeka Egbuka, a 5-star wide receiver out of Washington, is now crystal ball to Ohio State. So it looks like they're about to pick up another 5-star commitment in that class. One last recruiting note on the 2021 class you may have read. Corey Foreman out of Southern California. He was the #1 player in the country, a defensive end, just decommitted from Clemson. And word on the street is he might be taking a look at Ohio State. Now, he's from Southern California, right in USC's backyard. I think it would be a long shot to get him, but with the way Ohio State's recruiting right now, man, anything is possible. So that 2021 class looks like it's going to be special. And who knows?
Someone should go back and do a study, though. Like, I don't care. Okay, 4- and 5-star guys that are athletes. Why are you an athlete? I was just thinking as you were kind of talking about that. It's like, do those guys ever really work out, right? If you're not, is that because you can't catch and you're not a wide receiver, or there's something wrong, or you're just not, for sure a, defensive back? I just can't think of a single guy that was, came in as a highly, highly rated athlete and has had a big impact on the program.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, you're right. Usually, if you're in the 5-star, high 4-star, 5-star echelon, you've got a defined position.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, I know certainly the lower rated athletes have worked out in the past. See Darren Lee. He was a guy that came in as a quote unquote athlete, as a 3-star, but very low rated, and turned into a star player for Ohio State. So. That's kind of a snapshot of what's happening in recruiting. Really looking forward to seeing how that class rounds out. I would think Ohio State has got a massive lead, for that #1 overall recruiting class. And we'll see. Now, granted, all these kids are verbals, so a lot can happen between now and, the early signing period in 2021, but things are looking good. So there were some more developments over the weekend. If you pay attention to football, then the NFL draft just concluded yesterday. Ohio State had 10 players taken overall. 7 were taken in the first 3 rounds. Unless you've been living under a rock, then you know. Chase Young was taken #2 overall. He went to Washington. Jeff Okudah, #3 overall. Damon Arnett, a bit of a surprise, at #19, goes to the Las Vegas Raiders. A lot of the draft experts had him as a 2nd or 3rd round grade, so that was a bit of a surprise. J.K. Dobbins didn't go until the 2nd round, #55 to Baltimore. And then Ohio State kind of wrapped up day 2 with 3 third-round picks. Davon Hamilton to Jacksonville at number 73, Jonah Jackson, number 75 to Detroit, Malik Harrison to Baltimore at number 98. All 3 of those players were taken in the 3rd round. And then Jordan Fuller was taken in the 6th round on day 3. That was yesterday. He went number 199 to the LA Rams. KJ Hill, we'll talk about him. This was a bit of a surprise/disappointment. He fell all the way to 220. That was 220 overall in the 7th round, went to the LA Chargers. And then Ohio State's last pick, Jayshon Cornell to Detroit at 235, also in the 7th round. Paige, just wanted to get your thoughts on what was, otherwise a pretty successful draft for Ohio State. What do you think?
I think the big question is, are we happy and proud that you had really the first 3 players in the draft were all Buckeyes?
That's right.
And then 4 first-rounders? Or on the other side of that coin, are you disappointed that how the hell did they not win a national championship with those players?
Yeah.
I think that's, to me, the big piece. It's, I get the Burrow thing, right? He was hurt. He's not going to beat out Haskins. But it's awesome. I mean, it's definitely fantastic for the program. It's just a, walking advertisement. It was also interesting, sort of the TV numbers for the draft, just indicating how desperate people are for sports entertainment. I mean, I didn't watch a whole lot of it, but just the herky jerkiness of it was painful to watch. Like Roger Goodell, like just like egging on fans to boo him. I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is just it like made my skin crawl. It was just so annoying to watch. I couldn't deal with it. Yet it pulls in like the biggest numbers that the draft has ever had. And it's obvious, right? People are starved for sports entertainment. But huge for the Buckeyes. I think it's interesting with Dobbins. Where was he projected to go? Well, I had seen some things that thought he was maybe a first rounder, or was that not
I thought
true?
That was possible. I thought he might have been able to slip into the late first round. And what ended up happening was there was only one running back taken, and it was with, I believe, the last pick in the first round, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So only one running back was taken, and that just kind of goes to show how the running back position has been really devalued in the NFL game, right? It's really all about the passing game or stopping the opposing passing game. That seems to be the priority in drafting prospects. He fell. Now, what was surprising to me is that he was the last of the top running back prospects taken. He was taken after Edwards-Helaire of LSU, after DeAndre Swift out of Georgia, after Jonathan Taylor. I mean, God, if you're J.K. Dobbins, it's like, his entire career at Ohio State, Jonathan Taylor is getting the All Big Ten accolades ahead of him, and it's his entire career. Like, Taylor has always kind of been elevated by people who cover college football over Dobbins, despite outplaying him on the field. But here it is again. Taylor drafted ahead of him. Cam Akers out of Florida State also drafted ahead of Dobbins. I think what hurt Dobbins was he was still nursing that high ankle sprain from the Fiesta Bowl at the Combine. He decided not to participate in any drills, did not run in the 40, and as I understood it, was going to rely on his pro day at Ohio State to run his 40. And a lot of guys are more comfortable, working out in their own, college facilities and stuff. And unfortunately for him, because of COVID-19, that pro day did not happen, and I think that really hurt him. I do think Dobbins did have to lay to rest some concerns about his lack of top-end speed, and that's really the only knock I think you could have on the kid, because we saw throughout his career that he did get run down from behind a lot. You even saw, a player like Mike Weber, who is not the prospect that Dobbins is. Once he got out into the open field at Ohio State, he could finish. Dobbins had trouble finishing long runs. We saw it in the Fiesta Bowl. He had one that he did, but there was a second where he got run down from behind. I also heard Mel Kiper Jr. had some concerns about Dobbins' hands. which I thought was interesting because he seemed very productive as a receiver at Ohio State. But then I can also remember some key drops that he's had over his career, like namely, again, in the Fiesta Bowl. He dropped 2 touchdown passes in that game. So anyway, maybe the last kind of the final word on Dobbins was that Fiesta Bowl game. Who knows? Maybe a lot of scouts were looking at that. And unfortunately for him, he didn't have another opportunity to lay to rest any concerns about that stuff. So he falls to number 55. Yeah, go ahead, Paige.
Yeah. If it's just a single game, the microcosm, though, that, Mel Kiper says, he has bad hands. And the fact that the guy has an opinion on 700 players going into the draft is a miracle in and of itself. But they just pick and choose a few things, right? I mean, number one. And number two, I think it's how many offensive tackles were taken in the first round of the draft?
Yeah.
4, 5?
Yeah.
I mean, and so there was that blip where you had, and I mentioned it on the text with Zeke and with Gurley, where you think, maybe the NFL is changing their attitudes with top-end running backs. But then look at Gurley. I mean, he kind of fizzles out. I mean, you really only get, 3 to 4 years, of just top production of these guys, where if you get, a stud offensive lineman, you get 10 to 12. It always comes down to the offensive line. I think that's why those guys fell. Mm-hmm. Dobbins will be fine. He'll be great. He's a gamer.
Yeah. He's a great organization.
Taylor thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, in some respects, I'm happy he went there. I mean, growing up in Northeast Ohio, and just you have the Ravens seemingly doing everything always right, and the Browns seemingly always doing everything wrong. It's like, good for Dobbins. He ended up in a great organization.
Yeah, a great organization who likes to run the ball, right? Because the Baltimore's kind of bucked the trend. I mean, they have a ridiculous athlete at quarterback in Lamar Jackson, who's a great runner, but I think they ran as a team. They ran for like 3,000 yards last year, some ridiculous number between Mark Ingram and Lamar Jackson, and now you add Dobbins. He could not have ended up in a better situation. An offense that's a run-heavy offense, a great organization that knows how to pick, evaluate, and develop talent. He's in a great spot. And then you had Devon Hamilton taken number 73 by Jacksonville. I thought that was a great story, and he's another one of those stories that we've talked about that we're starting to see. It's at Ohio State. Devon Hamilton, as a prospect, as a high school prospect, 998th in his class, Hamilton. And he then and then here he is taken among the first 100 players, 73rd, going to Jacksonville. We'll get into this a little bit later when we talk about talent, but I think one of the things that any great college program can do is they identify guys outside of that top 300, right? Maybe not everybody sees the talent there or the ability there. They bring them into the program and develop them. Obviously, ton of credit to Hamilton for putting in the work. And then they become, day 2 or, day 1 or day 2 draftees. I think of Devon Hamilton, different position, but it reminds me of Terry McLaurin, right? McLaurin, not nearly as lowly rated. He came in just outside the top 200, but, was, again, a guy that needed a lot of polish and work, and he put in the work and ended up becoming, a day 2 pick and a starter in Washington. So,
absolutely,
yeah. So not a bad showing. I think the other thing that stood out to me about this crop of Ohio State draftees was KJ Hill, Ohio State's the school all-time leader in receptions, not taken until late into the 7th round. The number 220 player taken. I thought that was a bit of a disappointment. Certainly he was bummed. Now, clearly he did not have, top-end athleticism, top-end speed. You figured he was going to be taken somewhere, in one of the middle rounds, but to fall all the way to 7th, I guess that highlights what a deep draft this was at receiver. But still, you would expect he would have gone before the 7th round. That's a bummer for him. And then you have Ben Victor and Austin Mack not even getting drafted.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the KJ Hill thing is surprising. The Ben, Victor, Austin, I mean, Mac's just been, so many injuries. It's not surprising.
Yeah.
Victor, just that physical freak, but, I mean, I get it, right? And by no means do I pay much attention to this, but if you're not having a huge impact at the collegiate level, these guys think, well, how the hell are you going to do it at the next level?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably, now that doesn't apply to Hill, obviously, because he had huge production, but I bet you, I mean, if you went to somebody and, and just said, yes or no, does KJ Hill have the all-time receiving record at Ohio State? You'd be like, no effing way. Like, right. So, there just weren't that many, I guess, eye-popping moments with him where, he's like Ted Ginn just streaking down the field and you're like, you get out of your chair. It was always like KJ Hill catches a, 12-yard curl and, makes a guy miss or something. It's just, there was never those huge moments with him that maybe makes him stand out, yet he just was super productive.
Yeah, and I think he'll be a good pro. I really do, because there is a role for an athlete, for a receiver like KJ Hill in the slot. I mean, we've seen them in, Tom Brady's had how many of those guys, how many of those players over the years? The guy that he gets you 6 yards on 3rd and 5. I think he'll be a productive receiver in that role. If not with the Chargers, maybe with another team. I think between the 3 receivers that were, that were outgoing from Ohio State, Hill, Victor, and Mac, he has the best chance to be a good pro. I don't know. Victor and Mac, they play on the outside. Maybe Mac could be a player that moves to the inside as a slot receiver, but neither of those guys has the top end speed to be playing on the outside in the NFL. Mac's got fantastic hands. I mean, he made some great catches over his career. Now his problem is he couldn't stay healthy. But yeah, between the 3, I think Hill probably has the best opportunity to be a good pro. And lucky for him, you don't need blazing speed to be a slot receiver in the NFL. So we'll see how that goes. Well, hey, before we move on, do you have any other thoughts on the NFL draft?
I was surprised to see, and I think it might be a good segue, is the talent development versus 4-stars and 5-star recruits, where Donovan Peoples-Jones was, I think, a 6th-round pick. And right before we hopped on, I was looking it up. I didn't realize. Well, actually, LeMarie had an article about it. He was the overall number 12 recruit in what, 2018? I didn't realize, 5-star out of Michigan. I didn't realize he was that highly regarded coming out of high school.
Yeah.
And then to end up as a 6th-round pick, I thought that was pretty surprising, because he was one of those guys that you always just sort of penciled in about being worried about, but just never really had the productivity. Obviously, that's why he went in 6th round.
Yeah.
But that whole player development argument versus recruiting rankings coming in, I thought that was a great microcosm of, that raging debate you referenced earlier.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I did read that piece by LeMarie. So, yeah, Donovan Peoples-Jones was you're right, he was the 12th overall recruit in the 2017 class. He was the number 1 receiver in the country. He's from Detroit. He was the number 1 player in the state, the 12th overall prospect nationally, and he's taken in the 6th round. I know he dealt with some injuries, but probably a lot of it had to do, as LeMarie referenced in his piece, a lot had to do with the quarterbacks that were throwing to him. It stands to reason, had he chosen Ohio State, because I think it was down to Ohio State and Michigan for his recruitment, and he chose Michigan. Might have been a different story if he had Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields throwing to him, and maybe even J.T. Barrett compared to John O'Korn and some of these kids at Michigan. But yeah,
Wilson Spate and
Wilton Spate, exactly.
Shea Patterson. Yeah, I mean, God, what does that decision cost you, going from the potentially a 2nd or 3rd round to a 6th round pick? I mean, a financially devastating decision. So
yeah.
That's what happens when you choose Michigan.
All right, well, so that's a great segue. If you follow college football as closely as Paige and I do, and you're watching Twitter mainly, there has been this talent versus coaching debate happening between some of the Ohio State beat writers, some guys that run fan sites. I think it's just a telltale sign that it just isn't much else to talk about thanks to COVID-19. But just for fun, we thought we'd weigh in on this debate. I was referring specifically to Ari Wasserman of The Athletic and Dave Biddle of Bucknuts back in, I think it's mid-March, and they're still going at each other, by the way. They got into a Twitter beef on this particular topic. Wasserman has become the talent trumps all. He's like the champion of the talent trumps all perspective. And Dave Biddle, a little older, a little longer in the tooth. He's closer to your and my age, Paige. Bucknuts, he's recently argued that coaching is paramount, and the two of them have been going at each other on Twitter for like 6 weeks now. It's actually been kind of fun to watch. So I don't know where you stand on the talent versus coaching debate. I do think it's funny that it's become kind of this binary, kind of either or argument where only one side can be right. I tend to think both are actually pretty important. But if you put a gun to my head, I'm going to say talent is more important. Paige, let me get your overall perspective on the argument. What do you think? What's the most important ingredient between the two?
I was going to say exactly that. I mean, many times both things can be true. There's no way that either one of us are, that much of an expert to say one trumps the other as much as both these guys are portraying. Granted, it's Twitter, but it is pretty entertaining. And, just going back and looking, a few people have gone back and looked over time. And I think a lot of it is stemmed from the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, which, if that's the prism that you're trying to look through this argument, which these two guys kind of are, I think it's a pretty narrow view.
Right.
But there is a huge talent disparity. And Wasserman will say, hey, look, Ohio State's picking, the first 20 guys in a quote unquote, like mock draft before Michigan gets their first pick just based on recruiting rankings. This should not be surprising to anybody that they get their ass kicked by Ohio State every year. And I don't know how you argue that that's not true. And there's always going to be guys like you talked about Hamilton, guys that get coached up and get better. And there's going to be guys like Peoples-Jones that come in with, these accolades that just don't pan out. That's why you get to choose 25 guys every year. Some, turn out exactly as you thought, and some don't. But at the end of the day, there's just no question that the talent disparity at Ohio State is not just with the recruiting rankings coming in, but you also see it in, the draft coming out. And so, I you put a gun to my head, I'm more in Wasserman's camp. But player development is obviously a big piece of it. Yeah. But the fact that, they just say, well, Michigan can't do that, I find that hard to believe. I mean, for Christ's sake, two of our coaches were Michigan coaches. So if we don't think that Michigan can, recruit, do player development, well, we must have thought enough of it to bring them on to our staff. And by the way, pay them $1 million a year. So I think that the fact that they're trying to lay most of this at the fact that Michigan's not developing their players. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I buy that argument.
Yeah. I do think when you're looking at this debate between Ari and Dave, I think it's important to consider the generational gap between the two of them. Dave Biddle is closer to our age. He's an Ohio State grad. He's an Ohio State fan, and he lived through the John Cooper years. And Ari Wasserman, I think, is like 30 years old. He's not from Ohio. I think he's from Arizona. And he began covering Ohio State, I think, right in the middle of the Urban Meyer era, if not at the very beginning. Maybe he was. I don't think he was covering Ohio State during any of the Jim Tressel years. So he came in during the Urban Meyer era, where not coincidentally, Urban Meyer really took Ohio State recruiting to a whole different level. But if you're old enough to remember John Cooper and those Ohio State teams, then especially later in the Cooper years, specifically between, I'd say, 1994 and 1998, when Cooper was recruiting at the absolute highest level that he could, and Ohio State continued to fail in the Michigan rivalry and could not win bowl games. And despite the fact of having these loaded rosters with Orlando Pace and Terry Glenn and Mike Vrabel, and the list goes on, Sean Springs, Antoine Winfield, Andy Katzenmoyer, Eddie George. I know not all those guys played together, but basically they were all connected over that 4 or 5 year period. And Ohio State ended up with one outright Big Ten title over that span, no national championship game appearances. I think they only beat Michigan. Well, between 94 and 98, they beat Michigan twice, but they also lost the 95, 96, and 97 games, which all cost them a chance at playing for a national championship. And, the Cooper era was basically defined by his failures against Michigan, 2-10-1. He was also terrible in bowl games. He was 3-8, despite having some absolutely loaded rosters. So from that perspective, if you're Dave Biddle, if you're a fan from that age or of that age, you might emphasize coaching a bit more than talent, because Cooper failed to utilize that talent fully. I think we can all agree on that. I also think.
So I have a hypothetical. What would you say in those 10 years with Cooper, had Charles Woodson and Desmond Howard not gone to Michigan and gone to Ohio State? What do you think Cooper's record would have been through that 10-year stretch?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard to say. I mean, they were both transcendent players, right? That really elevated, especially Woodson. Woodson, I mean,
yeah.
He went on to have, he went on to be as great of a pro as he was a college player. I think Woodson, he could have definitely tilted that rivalry toward Ohio State had he gone to Ohio State.
Well, and the same with Howard. I mean, Howard didn't have the pro career, although he was picked 4th overall. But I just like those guys. I mean, obviously the fucking Heisman pose by Desmond Howard, Gallagher's favorite, is seared in our brain forever. But I think you could easily make the argument that they would have flipped the switch in at least 2 of those games. I mean, they made big plays in those games.
Oh yeah.
And you think back to the Woodson David Boston fight. I mean,
oh yeah.
So they both played 3 years, probably, right? I just think, had those 2 players not switched and gone to Michigan, which then goes back to the talent, side of the argument, I think that outcome might have been dramatically different in Cooper's favor in at least 2 games, maybe more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly would argue that Ohio State certainly had enough talent to beat those Woodson teams, not to go. They went 0-3 against Woodson, right? 95, 96, 97. His freshman year was 95. And, his freshman year, as a freshman, he shut down Terry Glenn in that game in Michigan. That was the Timbiaka-Patuka game. But I would certainly argue that, Ohio State had more than enough talent to win at least one of those. But no, you're right. He was a transcendent player, and he played on Michigan's side in that rivalry. Now, if you look at the last 20 years, Ohio State has had those transcendent players on their side, and that's why the rivalry has tilted. But just overall with the talent versus coaching debate, I certainly would emphasize talent over coaching. I think if you've got great players, you can overcome maybe some deficiencies in coaching. But I certainly think coaching is extremely important, having lived through the Cooper years. And then you could also look at what's happening at Clemson, right, with Dabo Swinney. I mean, that's a team that's been winning national championships, going to the playoff every year, and yet not really living in the top 5 of the recruiting rankings, like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, those programs. So you can overcome a deficiency in talent. I guess I'm kind of contradicting myself, but I still think talent definitely is probably the most important variable, followed very closely by a coach that can evaluate and develop talent. I think you have to have both. And I don't really see it as either argument.
Yeah, and you do, but there's actually, now I was thinking about it, there's really a third variable, right? Because there's been that argument, well, look what Clemson's doing without not having, top 5 recruiting classes the last 5 years. Well, guess what they've had instead? They had Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And lo and behold, the second they get those two guys, I mean, it wasn't that long ago where, Clemson was the team that couldn't get it done, right? You would wait for the Clemson gag at some point in the season, and it always happened. And lo and behold, once you get Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, well, that stops happening. Mm-hmm. So the quarterback play is just so dramatic, and maybe even more so. And then think about LSU. They've got 4- and 5-star guys on that team. They always have. Right. But then once they finally get the quarterback, what happens? Oh, they're the best team ever.
That's
right. And so, if you don't have the quarterback can make up for so much.
Yeah. And
not having that being a part of it, I think sort of, would actually make the argument a little bit even more interesting than it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So there has been one other beat writer or I guess opinion guy who's weighed in on this debate. His name's Steve Deace. He runs the Michigan podcast, which you can listen to on YouTube. It's actually an entertaining listen. I think Deace is actually a pretty knowledgeable fan. You can tell he's a huge fan. He's just like us. He lives and dies with Michigan football. He recently, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, put out a pod with the theme Top 5 Reasons the Talent Gap Doesn't Matter in the Ohio State-Michigan Rivalry. Just for fun, Paige, I thought you and I could pick apart his top 5 list here. This should be pretty fun.
That guy's a piece of work, man. What is that? His diploma that he has on his desk?
Yeah.
When he does the pod? Come on, bro. I mean, I like him. I'm not being, but you really? Is that your diploma? Oh.
Well, if you can make it through the 2.5-minute intro of Michigan highlights dating back to like the 10-year war, you actually might enjoy what he has to say. But just that in 2.5 minutes, oof, yikes. So Deace's top 5 reasons talent gap doesn't matter. Let's just go one by one on these, Paige, and break them down. The first, the perceived talent gap is the same now as it has been for decades. You kind of have to mention 1 and 2 together because he kind of, in point number 2, or reason number 2, he kind of backs up the claim that he makes in reason number 1. So I'll mention 2 as well. So he says, during the 10-year war, Ohio State had 88 players drafted, 15 first-rounders. Michigan had 74 players drafted, 8 first-rounders, yet Bo went 5-4-1 versus Woody. And then he goes on to say, during the Cooper era, when Michigan dominated the rivalry 10-2-1, as we just mentioned, both schools had 61 players drafted, but Ohio State had a 17-12 edge in the first-round draft picks. And then he goes on to say, since 2015, Harbaugh's first season at Michigan, Ohio State has had 45 players drafted to Michigan's 31, 17 first-rounders to 5 first-rounders. I actually adjusted those numbers to include this year's draft. Deace noted that 5 of those Ohio State first-rounders came in the 2016 draft. I don't know why he mentioned that. So basically what he's saying is, there's always been a talent gap in this rivalry. And it didn't matter 20, 30 years ago. Michigan was able to compete in spite of that. What are your thoughts on the points that he's made there?
I mean, I find what can you compare today that happened in the 60s and 70s in any aspect of your life? I mean, you're comparing apples to oranges. Like, football was so different then. I mean, they barely threw the ball. The numbers aren't that widely different. It seems like they're pretty even. So to try and make any correlation between the 10-year war in 2020, I find just laughable. I just like, dude, nothing is the same in football as in any other piece of our life. So why even try to make that analogy? I didn't get it at all.
I didn't get that at all. I mean, if you think about it, like, it's probably fair to say that evaluating prep talent wasn't the sophisticated science during the 10-year war that it is today. I mean, that's, you don't have kids practicing 365 days a year to play. You don't have, a lot of these high school programs now have spring practices. These kids go to these Elite 11 camps. I mean, it's so much more sophisticated. These prospects come in to these college programs ready to contribute right away because high school programs have become so much more sophisticated. So yeah, is it really worth examining what happened in the late 60s and the 70s? I mean, I don't think there's any comparison to be made. However, if you look at the numbers that he's presenting, we're talking about a 10-year span. 10 years. If we're talking about the 10-year war, Ohio State only had 14 more players drafted than Michigan over that 10-year span. I mean, is that really statistically relevant? I don't know.
No.
Yeah. Same with the, well, and then if you look at the numbers that he presented for the John Cooper era, we're talking about a span of 13 years, yet both schools had the same number of players drafted, 61 over that 13 years. And Ohio State only had a 17-12 edge in first-round picks. So only a 5 more players taken in the first round over 13 years. I mean, I'd say that's statistically irrelevant. And
and those Michigan teams had players, right? We already talked about like Desmond and
he left that out, by the way. He left that out, that during that period they had 2 Heisman winners, Desmond Howard and Charles Woodson, who were both from Ohio. And
they've had how many, in these last 20 years? Yeah. So that's why, it made me think of those 2 guys. And those Michigan teams, and, Cooper should have done better, but those were scary Michigan teams. A lot scarier than, Michigan, except 2017, Michigan is a shell of what those teams were, in my opinion.
I think, especially during that period, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would not be surprised that if we had a closer look, Michigan was recruiting the state of Ohio much more than they've been under Harbaugh, which for some reason they've decided not to recruit Ohio the way they used to. But you think back to that last Michigan team that won a share of the national title in 1997. They had a great battle with Ohio State in that Ohio State-Michigan game in 97. Michigan went out to the big lead, but Ohio State came roaring back in that game. Michigan had to hold on. But think about the players that had an impact for Michigan in that game. The first, obviously, was Charles Woodson, an Ohio player. Remember Marcus Ray from Columbus, right? And they weren't the only kids from Ohio that had a huge impact on that rivalry at that time and helped Michigan win a share of a national title. So I actually think that during the Cooper years especially, they were much more Michigan was there wasn't nearly the talent gap. It was a marginal talent gap at the time. And Michigan had, as we've already discussed, 2 transcendent talents from the state of Ohio during that period who helped Michigan win those games against Ohio State. So I don't agree with Dace at all on that. I don't disagree, though, with Dace's kind of overarching view that Michigan should be doing more with what they have. I don't disagree with that. I think they probably should be. I think it's reasonable as a Michigan fan to expect them to be at least more competitive. So if you don't have any more comments on those first 2 points, I thought I'd move to the point number 3, which is very interesting because then Day says if you look at the average recruiting rankings of the 2016 and through 2019 classes, in other words, the kids that make up the current rosters, the 2019 rosters, Clemson, who beat Ohio State, average player ranking 91.4 versus Michigan 90.1. So he's saying basically, a statistically irrelevant difference in terms of player rating between Clemson, who beat Ohio State, and Michigan, who got killed by Ohio State, 56-27 in 2019. Interesting way to view that, right? And again, this is to back up Dace's thesis that Michigan has the talent They're just not doing enough with it, and I think he's obviously pointing at coaching. Anyway, what were your thoughts on that approach?
Well, I already said it. That to me is all about the quarterback. Clemson has, Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. I mean, if Deshaun Watson played on Michigan, I bet you Harbaugh would have, won one of these 7 games. That guy was that freaking good. That's the difference. Clemson hasn't recruited, at the highest levels, but they at the most important position for the last, 6 years, they've had arguably the best player in the country.
Yeah.
And that matters. It makes a difference. And, he purposely picked Clemson, right? But if you look at that from a wider swath, all the other programs out there, maybe not even in the SEC, it paints a totally different picture. And to me, it all comes down to quarterback play, and you can explain it with that and that alone.
Interesting. That's a really good
point. And
point.
Wasserman kind of picked. Yeah, Wasserman was. He's like, look, you're just picking one school, right? What about all the other schools?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're basing it all on the outlier. That's a great way to say it.
Yeah. I thought that was an interesting point that Wasserman had made in retort to this. Yeah. Clemson is the lone outlier in the talent versus coaching argument, if you can call it an argument. They've managed to compete on an elite level despite not living in the top 5 on National Signing Day, although they did just sign the number 3 class in 2020. So, I think if Dabo Swinney would be all too happy to take the talent if he can get it. But I think it's interesting that he points to Clemson, because I think if Michigan's going to get back in this rivalry and start winning Big Ten championships and start competing on a national level, I think Clemson would be the model for that. Because one thing Clemson does, or they've managed to do, is they're very good at, is identify talent that maybe other programs can't see, and then develop that talent. A perfect example is Isaiah Simmons, right? He was a 3-star safety out of Kansas. They saw potential in him as a linebacker, and he was this amazing Swiss Army knife player for them that helped get them back to the playoffs. And maybe Clemson is the model. Michigan went out and they hired Gaddis, right, the offensive coordinator from Alabama. But I don't know if trying to mimic Alabama is the approach for Michigan, as long as Ohio State is in the Big Ten, because you're going to get out-recruited by Ohio State. Maybe the model is Clemson, which is you go for those kids outside maybe the top 300 that, could develop into great players at some point on the college level. So yeah, it is interesting that while you're looking at the recruiting rankings and the player ratings, Clemson has proved to be much better at identifying those diamonds in the rough that not everybody sees as talents and then developing them, which Michigan has done neither of that. I mean, I think that's, they're deficient in those areas too. The other thing too we could throw in there is like, okay, Clemson has managed to get back to the playoff year in and year out. Also helps they play in the ACC. And, the FSU and Miami have been dumpster fires for the last decade, and Clemson has marched pretty much completely unopposed through the ACC the last 5 or 6 years. But it is an interesting point,
Yeah.
I think if Michigan, again, if they're to get back to competing nationally, maybe Clemson's the model. The fourth point that he made.
Yeah, you got to take some Ohio kids. I mean, the fact that he's not recruiting Ohio, and I think Stoops at Kentucky's recruiting the living hell out of Ohio, and they're a pretty damn competitive football team now.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that sort of closes the gap enough if Ohio State is just taking the best players, from across the country, and then, you're plucking 3-star guys out of Ohio. Does that close the gap? But there's also that Ohio chip on the shoulder factor that,
totally
is huge. We see it all the time.
Well, it worked for Mark D'Antonio in Michigan State, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they stole a Big Ten championship from us in 2013 and 2015, and in the case of 2015, a playoff spot from us. So I think.
Well, the other thing with Harbaugh, and I read this that was pretty interesting, is that he hasn't started a quarterback in the 7 years that he's been there of somebody that he's actually recruited.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Now, Shea Patterson was a transfer, so kind of maybe, but he hasn't recruited any of the quarterbacks that he's since he's been there in 7 years. And I think we look back. I just think quarterback, the way football has changed, is just so important. And everyone thought, oh, he's going to be the quarterback whisperer, and yada yada yada. It hasn't materialized that way, and maybe he's just not identifying the talent or identifying it coming in and developing once it's there. I mean, McCaffrey,
all of the above,
from Colorado, right? I mean, he was a big time recruit. Yeah. Why isn't that guy playing?
Yeah. Yeah, well, he got his head knocked off against Wisconsin, right? I think he was that.
Yeah, that was brutal.
That ended his season last year. Yeah, I think all of the above. I think all of the above. We're talking about recruiting, player development, and Michigan is deficient in those areas across the board. The fourth point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it. What's his fourth point?
So the fourth point, again, he's comparing player ratings, in this case with LSU, who won the national title, as we know. LSU, who won the national title, average player rating from the 2016 through 2019 class is 90.8 versus Michigan, which is, again, 90.1. Day says that's statistically irrelevant, the gap between those two programs. Yet, LSU is having much greater success. Now, this is where I kind of feel like, recruiting rankings, you don't want to put all of your stock in recruiting rankings because, well, first of all, LSU just had 10 kids taken in the first 3 rounds of the 2020 draft compared to 2 for Michigan, right? And I think that demonstrates the difference between the talent pools both schools are drawing from and why you shouldn't always put your stock in player rankings because LSU is recruiting from the deepest talent pool in the country, And I think there's a very good chance that a 3-star kid from the deep South is probably a much better player than a 3-star kid from Pickerington, right? I mean, he's competing against the best talent in the country. You can only give out so many 5- and 4-star designations. So I think in this case, recruiting rankings don't tell the whole story. Michigan is not recruiting from you get the table droppings from the deep South. Those kids come up north. I mean, we've seen it like a kid like Chris Gamble, right, from Florida. Some of these kids, Ryan Shazier, another kid, also I believe from Florida, right, who were 4-star, but not like the big ballyhooed prospects. You come up north, those kids can become stars. So I would not have compared LSU and Michigan. I don't think the player ratings tell the whole story. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was surprised, and I don't have the numbers sitting in front of me, but there's 35 5-stars every year and 600 4-stars or some astronomical difference between the two, which to me doesn't really make sense. And as you were kind of talking through this, I'm like, why don't they go to a 10-star system, right? Because if you're, say, the 50th overall prospect in the country, and that makes you a 4-star, and you're the 499th, overall prospect, and you're still a 4-star, there's a big difference between those two. I mean, you could drive a truck through it, and I don't know if it's that big, but the numbers were way higher, way more than I actually thought. And so
that's a good point.
Not all 4, I guess not all 4-stars are created equally. Right. And then I think 3-star, even more. It's up to 3,000 3-stars. So it seems to me, these guys have nothing else to do with their time. Why not go to a 10-star system? And, if you're so damn smart, you can really, evaluate players completely across the country. And maybe that's exactly why they don't do it, because it's in exact science. But I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too. Well, and hey, LSU, might have, if you look at what LSU has been as a program over the last 20 years, especially when they had a Michigan guy coaching them, right, Les Miles, the one missing ingredient, and I'm pointing back to the point you've just made about the importance of quarterback play, what a difference that can make. Look what happened when LSU finally got an elite quarterback, right? They win a national championship. Joe Burrow, I mean, he was enough to push them over the top. Although they were winning quite a lot, LSU was, even without elite play at quarterback. But, kind of to your point about the difference at the quarterback position, which is another failing of Michigan, and where many of these other programs, including Ohio State, have been able to identify that player, and it's really pushed them, over the top. Dace said something else that I thought was interesting. Now, this was this is kind of in a follow-up podcast that he did to this one. It was a conversation he had with Ari Wasserman, also very entertaining. I recommend, if you haven't listened to it, check it out, because it actually gets quite contentious toward the end. But Dace said, with respect to Michigan, he said that Michigan will tell you, in their approach to recruiting, that of the top 300 kids in a given year, roughly 100 of them won't meet the academic standards and would be academic non-qualifiers, would not be able to get in. Another 100 or so Michigan won't pursue because of perceived character, off-the-field issues, bagmen, etc., leaving roughly 100 that Michigan would actually go after. So I thought that was very interesting, that if they're slicing up, if they're limiting themselves to about 1/3 of the top 300 prospects in a given season, that could also obviously explain, this talent gap that we're seeing, that it's become much more pronounced now than ever before. I was going to make one other point on that, and I wanted to go back to what we've seen recently.
Well, if that's true, and maybe it is, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, I have no idea, but if that's true, then why pay your head coach $8 million a year?
Right.
I mean, you're paying your head coach that money because you want to win national championships. Well, if you're going to handcuff him with the players that he can go out, and you could pay him $18 million a year. It's not going to make a bit of difference.
Right.
So let him go to the pros and pay your coach $4 million. And I think that's another thing, like of Wasserman's point, it's like, you're not paying your coach that kind of scratch to deliver the results that he's delivering. And if your recruiting, doesn't align with that, then what are you doing? It's never going to make a difference.
That's true. Well, and it's also kind of this contradiction with Michigan fans. It's just so annoying, right?
Right.
Because on the one hand, they're willing to pay Harbaugh, make him one of the highest paid coaches in the country. They've got this 110,000 seat capacity stadium. But on the other hand, they'll say, well, we're not willing to recruit a certain kind of player, right? We're above that. Which would say, well, we would seem to kind of like would suggest that maybe football isn't that big of a priority, right? We'd rather these kids be good students and good Michigan men, and I don't know, it's it's part of the annoying contradiction with those fans that kind of just drives me nuts. Like Ohio State will have a great recruiting haul, and then the first thing a lot of Michigan fans will say, well, they're on the take. How many bagmen? Right. Ohio State's paying them, and but I think they want to compete at an elite level. They really do. It's okay to admit it. All right, it's okay to admit that you want to be, you want to win national championships. And again, kind of back to the talent gap. I think we've reached, because I do think it is a huge factor in this rivalry. I disagree with Dace on that point, but if you look at where Ohio State has drafted, I mean, we're talking about a much shorter period now since Harbaugh, because these are some of the other numbers that he gave us. Since Harbaugh's come to to Michigan, Ohio State has drafted 45 players to Michigan's 31, 17 in the first round compared to Michigan's 5. That's over a much shorter span than the 10-year war or the Cooper era. That's over 5 years. And I think when you're talking about a shorter span like that, and you're looking at that big of a discrepancy, now we're starting to see, when you factor in, Ohio State's superior ability to develop talent and, game day coaching moves and that sort of thing, that now that explains why we're starting to see so many of these lopsided results in this rivalry.
Right.
42, exactly. 13, and 20.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I mean, just just a few days ago, right? Ohio State had now, of course, the annoying thing that's just happened, right, for a guy like Dace is he's looking at the overall draft numbers. Michigan and Ohio State both had 10 players drafted in this year's draft. Only Ohio State had 7 of their 10 taken in the first 3 rounds. Michigan had 8 of their 10 taken in the 4th round or later. But of course, that's a number that you can use depending on what kind of argument you're trying to make.
Right. Right.
But I think since Urban Meyer came to Ohio State, now you got Ryan Day taking the reins. Ohio State is recruiting at a whole different level, and I think we've reached a tipping point. Whereas maybe Dace could make the argument, the talent gap was statistically irrelevant, or it wasn't what it used to be. Now I think there's a tipping point where it really is making an impact in this rivalry.
Well, I think that's what he was trying to get at with Wasserman. And he was saying, look, I'm looking at it from a 15-year perspective. You're just looking at the last, 2 to 3 years. And I read another interesting statistic that in the first round that speaks directly to why talent matters. In the first round of the NFL draft, 7 of those players played their high school football in the state of Texas. And then there was like one other state had like 3, maybe one other state had like 2, like Florida or something like that. And then everyone else, there was like 8 states that had 1 player.
Wow.
But of those 7 players, this is crazy. Of those 7 Texas players played high school football in Texas, not one of them played at the University of Texas or Texas A&M.
I saw that. That's crazy. Yeah. Well, and it's nuts.
So, it's nuts. You got to have the best players, especially from your state. If they're not playing, it matters. Talent definitely matters.
So that brings us to the 5th and final point that Dace was making, pardon me, in why talent gap doesn't matter in this rivalry. He says, if you look at the 2019 game, a game that Ohio State won by 29 points, projected, the number 2 overall pick, Chase Young, and the number 3 overall pick, Jeff Okudah, combined for just 1 tackle against Michigan. No sacks, no tackles for loss, no interceptions, so none of the big statistics that you would expect. And yet Ohio State won by 29 points. And I'll go
that's
first on this.
Dumb argument.
This is a dumb argument because, okay, that's true. first of all, with respect to Jeff Okudah, I guess my retort to that would be, how did Nico Collins do that day? Right. I think he had 2 catches. So, the corner is one of those positions where you don't have to put up any stats. He locked down Nico Collins that day, and he was whatever. Okay, so you're right. Yeah, Chase Young and Jeff Okudah did not put up eye-popping stats in that game, yet Ohio State wins by 29. However, Ohio State had 3 other top 100 players in that game that went berserk. Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins, and Garrett Wilson. Fields threw for 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. Dobbins ran for 211 yards, 4 touchdowns. Garrett Wilson went for 118 yards receiving and a touchdown. So, it's when you have a depth of elite talent. Yeah, okay, so maybe your top-end guys didn't have great days, but you had a bunch of other guys on the roster that went berserk.
Yeah, that argument, I was just like, okay, I'm turning this podcast off. Somebody, there's more than 2 guys on the field, right, on our defense, right? Just because a guy doesn't make a play. And to your point, I don't think tackles is, on the top list of what they expect Ohio State corners, to be judged on. How about just guarding your, picking out their best wide receiver, and that might be something that we find important.
Well, let me even add to Dace's argument here. Okay, Chase Young did not have a great statistical game. Neither did Jeff Okudah, that he did shut down Nico Collins, which you didn't mention. But let me beef up your point here. Shaun Wade didn't play that day. And yet Michigan lost by 29 points. So, again, back to when you have the depth of ridiculous talent, Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins, Garrett Wilson, all top 100 players that had huge days. Of course, talent had was a huge variable that day. Be that as it may, I'm not going to disagree with Dace that you shouldn't be losing by 29 points if you're Michigan, and that if you're a Michigan fan, you should expect them to be more competitive. They should be doing more with what they have. I don't disagree with that premise. I think they should be more competitive. And if you look, Ohio State is not Michigan's only problem. Harbaugh has a .440 winning percentage against the top 25. He's 2-11 against the top 10. He's 1-4 in bowl games. I mean, he got his ass handed to him by Alabama in their bowl game without Tua. So while Michigan's talent deficiency is more pronounced against Ohio State, it's proving to be a problem against other good teams too, right? So
yeah,
it's a pretty.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Shea Patterson didn't get drafted, did he?
I don't believe so. No, yeah, and some of their top guys, their top end guys, that vaunted offensive line. Phil Steele, right? Didn't he call Michigan's offensive line in the preseason was going to be the best offensive line in the country? All those guys were late day 3 picks. So
right.
They could be doing more. In the end, I mean, if we're kind of wrapping up, putting a bow on this, in terms of talent, if you look at the 2019 playoff field, right? LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma. The AP final top 25. So after all the bowl games are played, after the playoff, LSU number 1, Clemson number 2, Ohio State number 3, Georgia number 4, Oregon 5th, Florida 6th, Oklahoma 7th. Look at the 2020 top recruiting classes: Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Ohio State. Then we look at the most players drafted by school through the first 3 rounds: LSU, Bama, Ohio State, Clemson, Florida, Oklahoma. Do you see a theme there? Are there? We see the same names, the same schools popping up in all of those categories over and over and over again, right? It starts with recruiting, and it ends with where these kids are drafted, and in between where they end up in, making the playoff field, where they end up in the AP final top 25 rankings. It's the same schools, and it's you can tie a direct line correlation to recruiting and talent. However, coaching is very important too, right? And you can't just, I think being a great at recruiting and bringing in talent isn't just drawing from the pool of kids that everybody agrees are good. You also have to be able to identify those diamonds in the rough. I mean, at the end of the day, these recruiting services are for fans, right? These rankings are for fans. I mean, like, if you're basing your recruiting approach on what 24/7 says as a program, you're screwed, right? This is why Ohio State has this massive staff of coaches that go out and find these kids. So you got to be able to do that too, and then of course you got to be able to develop them. And then on game day, you got to be able to deploy them, call the right plays, all that stuff. So in the end, I don't know how you feel about this. They're both very important, but I clearly give the edge to talent. What do you think, Paige?
Yeah. No, I think we both fall on the same side of the ledger on that one. Definitely beat that to a pulp. The other interesting thing, though, is didn't Day go to California to recruit somebody else, and he saw Olave?
Yeah.
And then, so you wonder about that guy's eye for talent, right? And then you have a guy like Olave that just comes out of nowhere and murders Michigan 2 years ago. And you're like, well, how the fuck are we going to compete, right?
Right.
This guy, like, it'd be okay if the 5-star guy torched us, but now we got to deal with this guy who looks like, oh my God, it's like, and when do you throw in the towel? Which was interesting. That guy, he basically has. He's like, look, I can't do it anymore. I mean, and it apparently the gap's only going to get wider here, and it'd be interesting. Do they even, they almost just ignore Ohio State at this point because they know they just can't compete.
Well, right. I mean, I think he said that. Yeah, I think he said, like, what did Day say? Something to the effect of, like, I'll get excited about the first 11 games on the schedule, but accept the inevitability.
I know we're going to get wiped out.
Yeah, we've talked about this in previous pods. We talked about whether this is even a rivalry anymore, which, if I think where I stand on that. I'm concerned about the health of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry long term, because things are trending in the wrong direction. If you look at the margins of defeat, not only just the last 2 years, but if you go back even over the last 10 years, Harbaugh's first year, it was a 42-13 game. That game was played in Ann Arbor, and then there were several just laughers during the Tressel era where Ohio State just blew them out. I went to the game in 2010, the game that was vacated because of Tatgate, but I was at that game, and that was a laugher. Ohio State won by 38 points or something. It was so. All right, well, hey, I think we've beaten the talent versus coaching argument to death.
Yeah, that was fun.
We'll do this again soon. All right, buddy.
All right, man. Good chatting with you.
Likewise. Talk to you soon.
Okay,
Go
bye.
Bucks.
Bye.